Teachers of Reddit, what is your best read the note to the class story? In high school, a girl in class passed a note to another girl asking if she had a pad or tampon. The teacher completely blew up, started yelling at them, and asked them to read it out loud. They did, and the teacher, who was an older man, immediately calmed down and let it go. I think he was more embarrassed than the girls. My then fiance was a high school math teacher, so one day she thought she saw a note being passed, but she wasn't sure, so she waited. And then she thought she saw it again. Finally, she saw it, walked over, and took it. It was a wedding card signed by half the class before she took it. She cried. And yes, she's now my wife. I like these stories where high schoolers are being nice and wholesome. It's a nice change from the usual hell-raising behavior that most people expect from high schoolers. Every once in a while, they surprise us with kindness and a good-heartedness. Student here, not a teacher, but in maybe 4th or 5th grade, a kid is trying to pass me a note and is caught by the teacher. I wasn't paying attention to where it came from, and I only noticed when it was about to be handed to me. She makes me read the note in front of the class. He reads the note, and it says, "You want to be my boyfriend? I like the way your booty moves when you walk." I overreact and say, "I'm not gay." And the boy says, "I didn't write that, it came from Tasha." Everyone laughs, and she and I are both extremely embarrassed. After class, I go to talk to her at the locker, and she says, "Yeah, I wrote it, but I don't like you like that anymore." Legend has it that I'm still single to this day. When I was in high school, we had a kid pass a note to another kid all subtle-like. They both sat behind me in the same row. The kid did not even read it, put it in his pocket, but the teacher saw. So she made him stand up and told him to pull out the note. He refused. She told him to pull out the note again, and he refused. She legit reached into his pocket and said something like, "Well, let's see what you are hiding from class." She saw the contents and went white. She grabbed both boys and led them to the office immediately. The note, which I later found out, said something along the lines of, "Package left in the second trash can of the third empty room," or something like that, with a gun. "You won't need it. Don't F this up." The police found a small amount of heroin and a .22 pistol with no ammo in the said trash can underneath some balled-up papers. This turned into a mess where the kids both claimed that neither one wrote the note and were not the intended recipient. So the school said that they would expel everyone from that line of desks, which our teachers pretty much stopped. The police tried searching all of our homes, but my parents refused to allow anyone into our home. So I was in band at the time and had to take a drug test every 6 weeks. My parents believed me, so they refused to allow the police to search the home. The event never got published because they could never prove anything other than the teacher saw 2 kids pass a note. About 4 years after graduation, I saw on MySpace, that long ago, that one of them died to an overdose and the other one was arrested for his murder. They never got him for the murder of supplying the drugs to a druggie, but did get him on a drug charge. I'm not sure why the police didn't just focus on the 2 boys that the teacher originally saw passing the note, who were brought to the principal's office. I think anybody with a brain would not buy the boy's story that the note was not intended for either of them. I feel like with that kind of information, there would be enough to get a search warrant for those 2 boys' homes, or at the very least, check the package and its contents for fingerprints. Seems like the investigation wasn't handled very well from the beginning. I guess they got their day in the end, though. A positive spin. I was long-term subbing a class, and one day I noticed students discreetly passing around a piece of paper while I was teaching. So I went to retrieve it and discovered it was a petition signed by each student requesting I remain their teacher for the rest of the year. In health class, we were talking about boners and how they fill up with blood. My cousin took a piece of paper and wrote, "Your penis is filled with blood," and threw it at some popular kid. So the teacher picked it up, and you can see him die inside because of the immaturity of 8th graders and how he has to teach them for a career. This teacher can be disappointed and disgusted, sure, but at least the kids are actually remembering and learning. I bet that day stuck with those kids for a long time, and they had fond memories of the day in health when they talked about all the blood that people have in their bodies. It's also really hilarious that the kid chose to word the note like that. So he was basically saying, "You have a boner right now." It's a weird thing to say to another person. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, I started a note from the back row of the class, which was passed and read by nearly everyone in the class. The teacher grabbed it as it went past him, and when there were only 3 people left who hadn't read it. I think he was going to read it out to the whole class, but he looked at it before he read it, and all the note said was that the zip on his pants was down. With all respect to him, he calmly zipped it up and continued teaching. Student here, not the teacher, and in my college thermodynamics class, the professor said that he didn't care if we got a text message in class. However, he did care if we had our ringers on. So, his rule was that if you got a text message and your phone went off loud enough for the whole room to hear it, you had two options. You could either read the text out loud to the whole class, or you could bring in donuts for everyone at the next class. And there were about 20 of us or so. Of course, everyone keeps their phone on silent, so this never happens until smack dab in the middle of one of the exams when the professor's phone gets a text message and rings out loud and clear in the middle of the exam. The professor freezes, takes one look at his phone as we all start giggling and says, "Guess I'm bringing you guys all donuts on Wednesday," and they were delicious. So, given that the teacher opted to get the entire class donuts instead of reading his text, makes you wonder what kind of text he received. Was he flirting with the hot English professor in the building? Or perhaps he just received results from his doctor about the status of his red lumps on his genitals. Whatever it was, apparently he was more interested in spending some money on pastries to save himself from the embarrassment. In the comments, what do you guys think the message was? One day in middle school, right around when the Nintendo Wii came out, we could add other friends online for certain compatible online Wii games by sharing a serial code of like 16 numbers or something around there. Sitting in the back of our 7th period science class, 3 of my friends and I started to exchange and write down our Wii serial numbers on a small piece of paper. We'd pass it down and share it as we passed it and copied them into our notebooks. Our teacher pauses his lecture as he looks at us. He just gets up from the front of the class, walks to our row where the 4 of us sat, put his hand out for my buddy for the paper with all of our serial codes on it. Takes a moment to glance at it only to see a matrix of random numbers followed by the first letter of our names. He then glances up at us and then to my buddy with the most dumbfounded stare, squints and asks, "Is this some kind of code? 'Cause I am clueless on this one." My buddy then had to explain himself and saved all of us the embarrassment and said, "I'll explain after class," as he blushed. Luckily, our teacher was a really cool dude and was fine with that answer and told us to just put it away. We told him after class and he understood, but also said he was expecting some sort of elaborate code that we were encrypting messages in. Not a teacher, but there was one teacher who was really cool, but still took his teacher job seriously. A lesson there is a note being passed around. Because of the giggling, he sharpened his senses and honed in on the note's location and intercepted the handoff. Did that getting ready for a speech, coughed, opened the note, and laughed. The note said, "Giggle and pass it on." There was another time he intercepted a note that said, "Happy birthday, Mr. Smith." And again, I appreciate it when kids are using passing notes to try and lighten the mood and atmosphere. This is much better than passing notes to bully them or make a joke at someone else's expense. I am curious, though, if the happy birthday note was already on its way to the teacher when he intercepted it, because that seems a little bit strange. Because why not wish your teacher a happy birthday out loud or just leave a card at his desk or something? I taught for a decade in a really rough area. I intercepted a lot of notes and was pretty shameless in public humiliation of my kids. I read a lot of bad stuff out loud. However, one really nice moment that stands out was when the super popular bubbly Latino girl sat next to the stereotypical depressed, weird white theater band girl. I see them passing notes, which is really uncharacteristic. The band girl seemed off and upset, but I let it go because it seemed like there was something going on more, and the Latina girl was a really nice kid. I didn't think that she was bullying or anything, so I had the girls stay after for a second and asked them what was up. The Latina girl said, "I was worried about her. She looked sadder than usual, so I wanted to make sure she's cool." I asked the other girl if that's what was happening, and she said, "Yep," and showed me the notes, which was a really heartfelt conversation about boys, relationships, and feeling lonely. It was so darn sweet. I asked if they needed more time, and they said yes. I could get them excused from the next class, and they asked if they could just chill and talk more. I said sure, because you bet your wellness and mental health is a crap ton more important than curriculum. They really had a moment, and it seemed to help them both. And this was as 10th graders, and I got to see them really develop a nice friendship over the next few years. You go, girls! Wherever you are now, I hope you're still friends, and I'm glad I could help facilitate that. That is so cool, and that is exactly the kind of teachers that we need in our schools. Far too often, a high school teacher takes their job way too seriously, treating their classroom like they're a college professor. And for some kids, especially in schools in rough classrooms, it is far more important to care first and foremost about the kids and their needs before the curriculum. The learning and the studying can come after everything else, and it often does sort of just fall in line after kids feel like they can be themselves and have a safe place. Everything good comes after that. Another non-teacher here, but my 7th grade teacher typically always wore a dress shirt to class and looked very presentable. But this day, he had his sleeves rolled up. Now, everyone loves this teacher, but my immediate thought was to write a note to my friend sitting beside me that his arms were super hairy, and that note was passed back and forth with us cracking jokes about it. Nothing malicious or overly mean, just that we didn't think that he would have such hairy arms. We eventually got caught, and in between classes, he took us aside and warned us not to pass notes. And since this was the first time this happened, he'd toss it out without reading it and let us go. Well, a couple months go by, and he decides to wear short sleeves again, and his arms are noticeably less hairy. Now, I know 12-year-olds don't have the greatest moral compass, but to this day, I still feel so bad that my dumb little note might have made him so self-conscious about something so unimportant. I'm sorry, Mr. Fifield, wherever you are. I think at the moment he might have felt self-conscious and probably very embarrassed, but the reality is that the student probably helped him in the long run. Because let's be honest, having very noticeable hairy arms is not a fashion or beauty trend, and it's not an appealing trait. Having a little bit of chest hair, sure, a good rugged look for guys. But having giant mini Chewbacca's for arms is generally not a sought-after look. So yeah, the student was probably in the wrong for making the comment, but I bet deep down the teacher is likely grateful that someone finally made him aware of his situation.